We just learned an 8th candidate has qualified for the next round of Democratic debates, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, who joins me now. Senator, good to see you. Congratulations. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing great. Thank you. We're happy to have made the fall debates, and we've got a lot of positive contributions in and people supporting me. I think they like the approach I took, which was to take it to Donald Trump instead of taking it to fellow Democrats up on the stage.
So this is an interesting approach for you, because you are someone who has traditionally been able to win in areas where Republicans otherwise win. You have some sense of appeal to moderate and Republican voters. How does that work for you as you move forward, trying to stake out something of a middle ground, a moderate amongst Democrats, and yet appealing to the Democratic base?
Well, Ari, I call myself a proven progressive because I am. I've passed over 100 bills where I'm the lead Democrat. And yeah, you find common ground, but you also have to stand your ground. And these are the things that I've done, which have allowed me to win in districts that are Trump won by over 20 points. One, I go there. I talk to people about the issues that matter to them. We haven't even talked about things like long-term care or the fact that 14 million people are going to have Alzheimer's by 2050, and we don't really have a plan of action. Those are big deal things. And so I've tended to go out there. I'm on the Ag Committee and work on those things. Second thing is I just get things done. And I think that's what we need in a president right now, not what we're seeing in the White House. So when those debates happen, I think people get really focused on their viral soundbite and on, you know, trying to take each other down. And I just keep thinking of the fact that the nation is watching. Independent voters, moderate Republicans who may have voted for Donald Trump are watching. We need those people to understand our own economic agenda, but also how the contrast goes with Donald Trump, the fact that pharmaceutical prices are skyrocketing and promises haven't been kept.
Let me ask
they
you
need to hear that from someone.
I know you enjoy digging deep into policy, so let me just ask you about this, because our Vaughn Hilliard's been talking to American farmers for over a year. They're on a razor's edge in terms of the money they make. They're really suffering, particularly in soybeans, but in a lot of other agricultural areas.
That's right.
Farmers in your state have received $681 million under Donald Trump's aid program to compensate the income loss because of the trade war. And the president announced he'd now impose a 10% tariff on the remaining $300 billion worth of imports from China. They will retaliate. They're going to take countermeasures. How do you walk this line? Farmers continue to support Donald Trump despite the fact that he is hurting their bottom line.
Well, I look at the fact that a lot of those farmers supported me, and I believe that they will in the Midwest in a presidential election. And that is because I believe we need to go back to the negotiating table with China. China has been cheating. We know that. Subsidizing industries, currency manipulation, stealing intellectual property. And yes, there is reason to push them. But I think that you target what you do instead of using a meat cleaver, or in Donald Trump's case, a tweet cleaver. And he's treating these farmers like they're a bunch of, you know, poker chips at his bankrupt casinos. And I've had one of them just crying in a closed door and saying, yeah, okay, I'll take that money, but this is my livelihood. Yeah. And the problem is, as this goes on and on and on, and his trade deficit mounts $891 billion record right now, so the strategy isn't working, we're going to have more and more people go under.
Senator,
and that's why I think
Joe
we
Biden,
need a lucid approach.
Joe Biden's, as we just saw in the morning consult poll, way ahead of you. A recent Quinnipiac poll shows him at 34%. You're at 1%, and he's declared himself the more middle-of-the-road candidate. You're obviously not really fighting for exactly the same voters right now that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are. Joe Biden's really a target for you. He's the person you're going to get votes from. How do you do that?
I just keep getting out there and making my case as a leader, as someone that can get things done and can win. I'm from the Midwest and have significant experience in this area, and I'm going to make my case. I've yet to be on the debate stage with him, so that'll be something I can look forward to hopefully this fall, now that I've made those debates. And I'd remind you that a number of people that became president were polling in this area around in the summer, because there's some people that they don't know as well, like me, and the voters have to get to know them.
One of the things I want to talk to you about is President Trump is again publicly contradicting his own intelligence advisors, sharing doubts that Russia interfered in the 2016 presidential election. Your colleague, Senator Mark Warner, tweeting earlier, quote, "I don't know if the president is willfully ignorant or he just wants to help. Either way, we need to protect our elections now." This is something that you have looked into and are taking quite seriously.
Exactly. I was on the Senate floor yesterday. Senator Warner and I were there together trying to push to get our bills passed. This is an unbelievable situation. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have died on the battlefield trying to protect our right to vote and our democracy. And to Donald Trump, it's a joke. He is completely dissing his own intelligence people, the head of the FBI, the intelligence director, who said Russians are doing it as we speak. Mueller said that under oath just last week. Solutions, two things. One, get backup paper ballots in every state in the nation. That's what my bill that I got gut punched from the White House on does. Make sure that that happens. Number two, make sure that these dirty political ads that are being run on social media have rules of the road like your network has, right? You've got to say where the money came from, and you got to keep the ads on file so other campaigns and people can see them and disprove them if they're wrong. Not so when the billions of dollars flow over to Facebook or Twitter or Google. They're making some voluntary efforts, but they don't have the standards applying to them. That is wrong, and we're feeding into a national security risk if we allow this to continue. I lead both bills that would fix this, one with Senator Graham and one with Senator Langford and Senator Warner. And these bills must go through, and they've both been stopped in their tracks by the White House and Mitch McConnell.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.